Hang on.
Oh, it's technology issues again.
Yes.
It's minor.
Where would we be without technology issues?
Oh, apparently we're on. Okay. I don't know how that happened because it says we're not. Oh no. Okay, we're good. I'm sorry. My head's all in the wrong place. It's because I'm just so excited about our special guest tonight, who is a young lad dreamed of being a weathercaster on New York television, and he has been 35 plus years at Fox 5 News. However, one thing has eluded him through all this time, and tonight he has finally reached the pinnacle of his career by being right here on the Joe
Yes.
and Joe Weather Show podcast, which is brought to you by Tempest by Weatherflow. Get the revolutionary Tempest weather system, and you too can join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link is on the descriptor of this podcast. And if you use the coupon code Winter 2324, you will get
10% off, ladies and gentlemen.
yes. So he's finally, you made it here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. We're going to mark this date down for history here. It's the 11th of March, 2024.
Uh,
It's nice to see
and
that you got all dressed up for our show tonight. We like our
well, of
guests.
course. Of course. I couldn't otherwise. If only I could have brought a snowstorm with me, that would have made it even the best, right?
Well, the snow fans on the chat board would have most appreciated that for sure.
Well, this is
Nick
the
Ray,
130. This is the 136th anniversary of the start of the 1888 blizzard. So there is
Correct.
some auspicious weather behind all this.
but
That's right.
we're not commemorating that particular anniversary in any way, shape, or form tonight, weather-wise, except for the big wind. Everybody blew away today with 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. I saw the city went to 58, and we had up by you, over 60, right? So,
Well, that Stony Brook wind anemometer is like, I don't know, 60 feet up in the air or something. So
yeah, I think they said 160 feet. Yeah, so
yes. So welcome to everybody tonight on the chat board for this very special Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast with our guest Nick Gregory of Fox 5 News. If you're
well, and
35,
I was going to say, let me first say thank you so much for having me here, right? So,
well, we've
you
been trying
guys
forever to
have,
get you on here, and you just kept
well,
you just avoided
you
us.
people had to talk to you people had to talk to my people, had to talk to your people. No.
Right.
But my point is, thank you so much again. This is a great pleasure, and you guys are great, and I'm thrilled to be here. This will be a lot of fun.
Great. And everybody on the chat board so excited. So if you have any questions and any nice comments, we will certainly pass them along. But we encourage, if you do have questions, put them up. And of course, for those of you who are lurking in the background, if you want to ask, you got to use your Gmail account to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And make sure you turn your notifications on so you don't miss this nightly spectacle that goes from Sunday through Thursday at 7:35. Although we've got some schedule changes that we talked about last night. We'll talk about that later coming up. And if you like the show, hit the like button because Joe, he just does his day is not fulfilled unless he can ring the bell. Am I right, Mr. Rayo?
Well, we're hoping that we'll hit 100 likes, and with Nick here, we may even hit more than that. I would hope.
Oh,
So
we'll see.
we'll see how this happens. We already got the first question for Nick from our friend Rich Rothmansky on the chat board, who was asking you, Nick, do you remember Dr. Berryman and Dr. Fingerhut from Linden State?
Yes, of course. So they were when I left. I left Linden in '81, and I actually graduated in '82. And both Berryman and Fingerhut were there. Fingerhut actually was taught climatology. It was in one of his classes, and Dr. Berryman was sort of my supervisor for. It's kind of a long story, but I ended up finishing my meteorological degree at Georgia Tech in Atlanta because I had been hired by CNN. And Lyndon allowed me to finish the theoretical meteorology classes at Tech and transfer the credits back to Lyndon so I could graduate with my class. So Dr. Berryman was a big part of that because he was sort of my advisor overseeing that everything went smoothly. So
You've
nice
really had,
people.
you've had quite the career, because you basically started. You didn't go you didn't start at the smaller station route. You kind of sort of jumped right in to CNN. But even before that, by the way, Alan Casper is watching as we speak. Okay.
Oh, well, and I saw the whole show you did with him, the whole podcast. That was terrific. It was so great to hear him and see him, and brought back so many great memories. That was terrific. You guys did a great job, and I'm so happy. He looked great. He looked terrific, and it was so great to see him and great to hear you guys interact with him. All those great memories of the past. It was
Well,
wonderful.
he was another one that was like pulling teeth to get him on the show, but finally.
Well, you know Alan as well as I do. It's pulling teeth to get him to do anything, right? So,
Well, he's gonna come back. I was kind of thinking about, maybe one night we'll do a Hollywood Squares and get a bunch of people, on
oh,
all at
that would be
once.
fun.
But yeah, you just so you started. So actually, just on that line, because your career and my career are actually directly tied to Alan, because you were working as, I don't even want to call it an intern, because you really were sort of an associate producer uh, at when you were
Well,
when you were
yeah,
there.
I started as an intern though. That's how it started. I was very fortunate at the time in the late '70s that I went to Iona Prep in Rochelle, and they had this senior project where you had to select something that would last your entire senior year, and they wanted it, like a something that would be career related, and that all got started by Joe Whitty, who was at WCBS at the time with Alan, and we had this thing back in school then called mini courses, and they were 2-day courses on a Thursday and a Friday in March, and there would be courses that people would request, or the students would request, like car racing and cooking and that kind of stuff. So the vice principal, who knew I was a weather nut, well, a nut in general, but it was certainly a weather nut, said, "Hey, do you want to put together maybe like a weather mini course?" So I said, "Well, maybe." So I figured, okay, I've got to maybe spice it up and see if I can get a guest speaker. So I ended up calling the Channel 2 weather office back then, nervous as all heck. Who was I going to get on the phone? And it was Joe Whitty. And I introduced myself and I said, "Hey, listen, I don't know if you come and speak to schools, but would you come and speak to my class?" And he said, "When?" And I said, "This day in March." And he looked at his calendar, goes, "Yeah, I could be there." I was thrilled, right? So I remember I picked him up at the train station in Eastchester, uh, and again, here I have Joe Whitty in the car, and I'm nervous as all heck. Um, and he had a Greek sailor's hat on, and I said, "Oh, did you get that here? Did you go to Greece?" Oh, he goes, "Well, my wife and I went to Greece last summer, and we love Greeks and the Greek people." I was like, "Well, I'm Greek." So anyway, that started this conversation, and then I asked him if I could be an intern. I had to do the senior project, and would that be possible? Could I do something at Channel 2? And he goes, "Well, let me talk to my boss, and I'll get back to you." And 3 weeks later, he said, "You start in end of August." So that's what got the ball rolling. And I remember he goes, Alan, because I was thrilled to be able to meet Alan too. Because I mean, my parents will tell you I wouldn't go to bed at night unless I watched the 11 o'clock news. And I mean, that was a must.
You were not a
And
if the ratings were four for that 11 o'clock news, we were three
we
of the
was
four.
exactly. I mean, that was a must. So I remember Joe's telling me, and Alan probably remembers this. he said, Alan kind of likes to work by himself, so you'll just kind of work for me, and just this weekend leave Alan do his thing. So I started working at Channel Two, and it must have been the second night. Alan would come in about 5 o'clock, and he walks in. I'm like, oh my god, there's Alan Casper. And he goes, "Oh, you're Nick. You're Joe's weather guy, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Why would you like to do some work for me too?" Well, I was, thrilled. So I ended up staying after that. The long story short is, after that internship, you're right, I ended up staying on as the weather producer behind the scenes for a couple of summers, and that's how you and I connected at some point
Right.
there.
That's
So
you and I connected. And then when you went back to school, Alan, this was like a total chance encounter for me. I had already at one point been at, uh, actually twice. I had been to the Channel 2 weather office once to visit Joe Whitty, and then the second time, um, I'm trying to remember now to get the story straight. Well, I'm not sure, but the second time, yeah, I think I went to meet Alan, and then some time had passed by, and then you and I met somehow. I can't remember how, but or maybe it was the day I came in to see Joe Whitty that you were there. It's possible that
I
that was
think
the case.
I believe that it was, and then we figured out that we lived 3 miles from each other.
Right, we did. Because you lived in Eastchester on the other side of Wilmot, one side of Wilmot Road. I
Yeah,
lived in the
New
Scarsdale
Rochelle.
side in New
Yeah,
Rochelle. Right, so you were
right.
there, and then I was on the other side of Wilmot Road. Um, anyhow. So when you went back to school, Alan happened. I was working as a I was working at the Weather Service at the time in a paid internship, and my time was coming to an end. And you remember the old phones? You had the buttons, and they would light up. Okay, so I accidentally hit one of the wrong button to pick up the phone. I picked up, and Alan was on the other line, and he was on hold. So we started talking, and I had said, kind of, he asked me about, I was working at the Weather Service. I said, yeah, it's been great here, but I'm kind of depressed because my internship is up, and I have to go back to school. Going to go back to school for the 6 months, but I was going to have to find a job. Needed to find a part-time job. He says, "Oh well, Nick's going back to school. Why don't you come work here?" So then I wound
Perfect.
up so I wind up stepping in. And then for me, when I left to go work at the Today Show with Willard Scott, George Cullen, I met George Cullen, who came in one day to see the weather office. And then when I left, George stepped in. So it was just about, you know,
It's funny
Rayo,
how that all worked out,
Rayo,
right?
Joe, you were not part of this triangle that I'm talking
Well,
about here.
actually, to tell you the truth, I had at City College, I was the person who would get speakers at City College. On Thursday, we had the Thursday afternoon seminars, and one of the people who I managed to get was Joe Whitty, who came down, I think, in November of it was either 74 or 75. Very, very nice guy. Came down, gave us a lovely talk. I came up to him afterwards. We had some lunch together afterwards, along with Stan Getzelman, one of our professors, and
And the man.
yeah, it was nice. And I kind of like, can I come down to CBS and see you work? And he said, you can come down anytime you want. And I was not an intern per se, but I did make a number of different visits. I'm surprised that you and I didn't run into each other, Nick, during that time frame. There was another person there, Eric Chesanoff, who
Eric
worked
Chesanoff.
Yes.
who worked at CBS, and I got to know him rather well. And it was the old CBS Weather Center with the teletypes
Oh
installed,
yeah.
and each stall had a name to it, and each person who worked there, it was their responsibility to change the teletype paper when it ran out, or they had to change the blade on the old fax machine. but
How many times did you cut your finger on that blade, right? Changing the old blade.
oh, it's. But I will also say you were lucky with Alan, Nick, because there was one night when I was with Joe and Joe left, and I said, "Can I stick around to see Alan Casper?" And he said, "Oh, sure, he'll be in any time now." And it was around 6 o'clock. Alan comes strolling in. No, it was 7 o'clock. Alan comes strolling in, and I said, "Mr. Casper, my name is Joe Rayo, and I've always wanted to meet you." And basically, he did his Greta Garbo. He said, "Thank you, it's nice meeting you. I want to be alone." And he kind of shoved me out the door and slammed the door behind me.
Oh God.
And that was my first encounter with
Uh,
Alan. Years
so
later,
funny.
when he was at Fox-5 and Jersey 101.5, Alan used to call me up at CompuWeather, which is where I was working, and said, "Would you mind sending me the latest European or the latest long range maps off of WSI?" I never did get around to saying, the way you treated me the first time I met you at Channel 2, you really don't deserve. But no, we all
So funny.
enjoyed Alan, and we worshipped Alan because Alan was really the guy on television in the 70s and 80s, probably the best synoptician and by far and away the best forecaster. Alan, I hope you're listening.
Oh, he's
I, you
listening.
know, I, I have to tell. So if he's listening, I have to tell. And you know these stories too, Joe. Um, so one about he talked on your podcast about Harvey Leonard, and Harvey's another wonderful guy. I mean, just I first met Harvey in 1978, sort of through Alan because Harvey and Alan would talk in the Weather Center on occasion, and then at Linden we used to have a storm conference every year, and Harvey came to one of the conferences, and that's when I first met him and introduced myself because he used to hear me in the CBS Weather Center. Anyway, so Alan would hear the AccuWeather forecast, or he'd turn the radio on in the Weather Center when AccuWeather was broadcasting, and he'd be on the phone with Harvey. And he'd take the phone receiver. He goes, "Listen to this. Are you listening to this?" And he'd put the phone against the radio with the AccuWeather forecast, and just they would go off on what they were saying. It was sort of a standard procedure. So one of the many Alan Casper stories. And by the way, Joe Whitty fans, Joe, as you pointed out, is one of the nicest people you'll ever know. He's doing great. He lives in Southern California. He's worked for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab out there, and he's been doing stuff for them for a while. So,
We've been waiting 2 years for him to respond to Joe Rayo's email.
all right. Well, I will now make it a point to get him on the show.
I think we got the "I will get back to you." Was that the last email, Joe? I will get back to you.
Something like that.
Well, he's a proud grandfather now, so he's probably consumed with his granddaughter there. So, but he's doing great.
And as with three of my own grandkids, I kind of understand that.
Yeah,
Yes.
the funny thing about Joe is, again, we got together. We spent a lot of time seeing each other in the mid 70s, 75, 76.
Don't make us older than we already are, please.
But the thing is that I ran into him at an NWA conference. I think it was in Salt Lake City with my wife Renata, who's also a meteorologist. And he said, "Wow, isn't it this amazing? It's been so all these years, and here we are back together again." I was just this college kid. Joe was on Channel 2, and now all these years later, here we were together again. And he was actually not a meteorologist. His forte. He was a glaciologist, if I recall correctly. And then, in fact, when we asked him at City College how he got his job, he said, "Well, I actually started out tending bar out in Seattle, and somehow or other he told a story about how somebody at the local station ran into him, and they got together, and that's where his TV career started, out in the Pacific Northwest, and then he worked his way east to here in New York, and then he bounced around. I think he was one time he was at Channel 4, NBC in the mornings, and
Yeah, well, he went from WCBS to KYW in Philadelphia,
yeah,
and then he went from KYW to Milwaukee, if I'm not mistaken. He was in Milwaukee for a while, and then he made the trip back to New York doing early or Sunrise, NBC News Sunrise, which is like early today, whatever. So,
right.
And doing some local WNBC stuff.
And Maurice Dubois, who is now the anchor on CBS News during the evenings, Maurice was actually on in the mornings with Joe Whitty at that time,
Yes.
back in the I guess it was the 80s. So you see how everybody has evolved over all of these years.
Well,
Yes.
and it's really incredible how all these chance encounters have led you down, have led all of us down, this path that we've taken, career wise. And it's a dice roll. So for whatever reason, we all wound up doing what we love to do, what we always wanted to do. And I always tell youngsters that find that career, find that thing that get really is your passion. Because if you can work doing that, you never really will work a day in your life. Okay. Yeah, you got to deal with the same nonsense that everybody deals with when you go to work. People, a lot of people have this image about working on television, and we all just, we wake up beautiful, we go to work beautiful, we kind of stroll in, into a
Wait,
studio
wait a
with
minute.
lights, and
You don't? You don't? I mean,
no, not.
I mean, no.
But you know what
Of
I'm getting.
course.
But you know what I'm getting at,
Yes,
and
of
Not
course I do.
not because he's here with us tonight, but I do want to say that Nick is one of the, if, among all of the TV and radio weather people on the air now or even in the past, he is really one of the good guys and highly respected, very popular. And to prove how popular he is and was, there was a point, I don't remember exactly, I think maybe it was in the early 90s, Nick, where they were looking to make a move at Channel 5. And yet, all of your fans came to your support and refused to let Channel 5 make that move. Do you want to just tell us about that little episode?
Well, I mean, yes. You know how I don't have to tell you, how the television business works. I mean, for good or for bad, we're sort of at the mercy of whoever's running the show at the time, and you're kind of only good as your last contract. And yeah, they had thought, maybe that it wasn't that I wasn't the look that they wanted to go for, and they wanted to make a change, and that's just how our business goes, right? So yeah, you're not necessarily happy with that sometimes, but you kind of go with the flow because that's what it is. So they had moved me to weekends, and we had a nor'easter that came up the coast, and so they sort of brought me back in to do the nor'easter because things had not gone well uh, with the other coverage, and that's when that all started. That the people sort of got together. There was a PR guy that was a weather fan of mine, I guess, and he decided to make this push to try to get me back on. I was really flattered and overwhelmed that people would do something like that, and very grateful for that. But again, how our business goes. You just kind of go with the flow and move on. And it turned out that I just stayed the course. I mean, I stayed on weekends and I just did my thing, and I'm still here. All these years
well,
later,
on,
still
on
here.
on this topic, we have a question, Joe, from Mr. Ruben Fairchild.
Okay, what's the
I
question?
know I have the question, but I just wanted to let you know, just for dramatic pause, that we have a question from
Okay,
Mr. Ruben Fairchild. Nick,
okay,
Mr. Ruben Fairchild. Um, well, anyway, I'll explain it to you later.
Okay.
So he says, he wanted me to ask, how many general managers have you worked for over the years? And if any one of them tried to change your style, your persona on the air. And I guess all of us
So
have sort of gone through that.
yeah, I mean, I think I'm on 9 general managers and 10 news directors. So although Harvey Leonard has the record for that, I think he went through 30 news directors because they would change every 6 months when he was at the station in Boston.
Really?
Um, yeah,
Jeez.
pretty crazy, right? 30 news directors. So no, but nobody really. I mean, there was one news director who kind of, it wasn't just me, but he wanted all of us to sort of be punchy on the air and sort of yell and shout at the camera, and that kind of wasn't my style. I kind of told him that. He wasn't really happy about it, but not from any general manager. They just sort of oversee the rest of us, So but sort of one news director just wanted me to, and again, it wasn't just directed at me. I think it was just the look he was going for. And he just wanted us to be sort of this edgy, in your face kind of newscast. And he, he called me the Perry Como of weather.
Oh God.
Uh, uh, so, and I said, well, I kind of like Perry Como. I'll take that as a compliment, you know. So
Yeah,
that was a long time ago. That was over 20 years ago. That was a long time
Well,
ago.
you survived them all.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here doing my thing. I mean, I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to keep doing it here. I mean, this is I grew up in New York City, and as you pointed out at the beginning of your podcast, this is what I dreamed about from when I was young. And my parents always thought I was nuts, wanting to be a meteorologist, but
Mine
from
too.
yeah, right, getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was 10 years old to listen to no weather radio to track the latest hurricane out in the Atlantic. My mother would come in and just shake her head. But no, I've been fortunate that I've been able to stay the course, and that they've been supportive of my work, and I keep getting renewed. So that goes in the
Which
business. We
is
run on
good.
our 2 or 3 year
Well,
contracts. Yes.
you're, I hate to say this, but you're also at the age where you could sue if they didn't.
Well, let's hope it never comes down to that. And
No,
it's
I
always
understand. I understand.
but yeah, I mean, no. Again, it's nice to know that I'm still. They still value my work here, and I think we have a great team. And that's the nice thing here is with Mike Woods and Audrey Plente. We've
Who,
gotten
by the
along for
way, who,
years.
by the way, she watches the show and she does
She
lurk in
told
the
me.
background. Yes, we know.
She told me so.
And we're thrilled that she
So
does.
yeah,
We're
She may be,
absolutely
and
thrilled
she
that she
may be
does.
next on the Joe and Joe show if she
Well,
wants
we'll
to.
get her on too.
Yeah. Tom Contino, one of our people on the chat board, Nick, is saying any fond memories of John Roland. I always respected his no
oh
nonsense
my gosh.
presentation of the news.
I mean, so many fond memories. I mean, we worked so closely together for so many years, and I was so saddened when he passed away last year. We didn't see each other as much because he was spending most of his time down in Aventura in Florida. Um, one funny memory was we were doing a charity. I think it was for the American Lung Association, and it was back in the day when they used to have these bachelor auctions. I don't know if you remember those, right? Where you would be auctioned off to the highest price for a
Right.
date. And so John was single at the time, and I was single at the time. So we were both auctioned off together. It was a package deal. And John owned a restaurant at the time. He was partner in a restaurant on the Upper East Side. So the deal was the two winners would come to the station and watch our newscast, and then we'd all go out to dinner. So that was a lot of fun. Uh, I mean, God, where do I even start? I mean, so many great memories. He had a home out in West Hampton,
Yes,
and every year
I
he,
had been there once for a party because he was best friends with
yeah,
Marvin Scott, and
yes,
I worked
exactly.
with Marvin. So Marvin invited, uh, Marvin was anchoring the at Nick's when I was there with me and with Mary Murphy, and we were invited out, and I got to meet John. Very nice man. He was really very
Very nice
nice.
man, and yeah, he used to have those parties out in the Hamptons. And one time it was a golf tournament he hosted for a bunch of us from the station and from the current affair crew back in the days of a current affair, back in the late '80s, early '90s. And Maury Povich, of course, big golfer, he was out there. Um, but that was he was a nice guy. He certainly was. He was one of a talented writer. I mean, he used to get on the writers here because he was big on writing and he wanted it to be written properly. And yeah, just I miss him, and we had a lot of fun together uh, during the commercial breaks. Telling jokes and stories. Great, just a great guy.
Nice. Just want to acknowledge, by the way, the chairman Scott Briller on the chat board hitting the tip jar. Thank you, Scott. He says. Uh, New York City, at least at Central Park, will may be setting a record for two consecutive winters with less than 10 inches, which has never happened. Do you think this is a blip or is the trend your friend?
I think it's a blip, right? I mean, Look, if you look back at history, maybe there's times we've gone through winters that have been rather snowless, and then we make up for it eventually. Um, I still think, as you guys and Alan pointed out during his podcast, we got at least one more shot, maybe two, for this year. And the models have been hitting at something early next week. And
Right.
I just looked at the 18. I just saw the 18Z GFS came out.
I
It's doing
saw
it
it
again.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. So again,
None
is
of
it
the,
eye
none of the other
candy? Is it
none of the other ones are, by the way, but that's
no? Well, but they're showing the trend towards cold for that week, so
right.
it's so But I still believe, as Alan had stated too, that, and you guys I think acknowledge that maybe we got one more, maybe at least one more chance, maybe two. We'll see.
Right. Al, also, I want to just acknowledge Anthony Sparacchio for hitting the tip jar. Thank you, Anthony. And he does welcome Nick Gregory to the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. And I got a question. It says, all of us, the three of us, we've spanned over a, a, a a period of time where so much has changed, uh, especially in the television industry, which is we're at the point now where linear television is going bye bye, or it may still be there, but it may be there in a far very small capacity, and the advent of social media and all the rest of it, and I just want to kind of get your take, Nick, on having to, sort of weave all of that. The days of just walking in, you're doing one show, you're doing two shows, you go out to a 3 hour dinner if you're lucky, are long gone. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, but I just want to, I'm curious about your particular take on it, because, a lot of the folks that I guess are our age, okay, uh, some of us kind of, we went with the flow, and others struggle with it. And I'm just, again, I just would like to, I'd like your angle on this.
Well, you're right. Things have changed technology wise, and also what's available to be viewed. And when you look at how the pie has been sliced from back in the days of the 70s and 80s, when there was five stations you could choose from, and that was about it. Now you have so many different sources. You have this, you know. You,
Right.
I mean,
Your enslavement device.
yeah,
Because that's
good
what
way
it
to put it.
is.
It is.
It's
It
an
is.
enslavement device.
Um, it is, and so I think as the with the advancement of the technology and the platforms that are out there now, that's where the industry is going. My belief is there'll always be a need for local news, and particularly local weather. That still is the number one reason people watch local news, for whatever's left. So, but what platform is that going to be on? Is it going to be, as it's already started, shifting to streaming, or and something like this, podcasts? So the future is probably that path. It'll be just more work for the person doing this job, for less pay.
At less pay, of course. So, yeah, those two always go hand. Well, actually, if you think about it, adjusting for inflation, uh, the salaries of on-air people has been in a steady decline since the early 1980s, and it just continues to do so. I mean, the it went from getting the best people, the best talent, uh, the best at their craft, and then gradually it just sort of worked down to where it is now, where it's like those people are getting cast by the wayside. Not everyone, but a lot of them are. They get cast by the wayside as they get older, and they get replaced by people half their age and a quarter of the pay. I mean, I understand that's the economics of the business, and the stations don't make the kind of revenue that they used to make, uh, because it's like you said, it's all on social media. But the one thing that social media has brought is the fact that you have to, you do have your fan base and your enemy base, all on one page. And years ago, you'd get a phone call or a letter or a couple, every once in a while, you get some crazy person call on the phone. They do, they say something nasty, you hung up and you never really thought about it. Now all of that stuff is like always in front of you. And I find sometimes for me it's a little bit difficult to take with regards to, we all like to see the good stuff and the complimentary stuff, but we also get a lot of other stuff and a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Joe, and I think the way to approach that is just to be in this business, you got to have thick skin,
oh yeah,
and I mean, even prior to the social media craze, you know as well as I do, you bust a forecast and you'll hear it, just walking on the street, somebody will say, "Hey, where's that 8 inches of snow? Or where's that?" The sun's dimly lit through the clouds,
right,
and you
right.
sit there like, oh yeah, I know, I blew it, what have you. So over time, you just develop that thick skin, and in the social media platform, for my speaking for myself again, I'll read them all, and you can't make everybody happy, you never will. And if I made you happy and I made you smile and I made you whatever, then I've done well. If you feel otherwise, well, I'm sorry, I'll try better next time.
I often say, and I do give a library talk called the pseudoscience of astrometeorology, where there are people out there who actually believe that they could forecast using the motions of the planets or the moon or the sun or whatever. And at the end of the talk, I point out that during my time on television, I would say that I was right, maybe nine times out of 10. And I said, you know what? I never got any emails from people complimenting me on how my forecast was accurate, how I did forecast 6 inches of snow and it did get 6 inches. The only time I ever heard from anybody was when, as you used yourself, Nick, the term, I blew it. And then you start hearing from these wise guys out there saying, what happened? You called for flurries and you got 4 inches up. And I use the analogy at the end of my talk. I bring up a picture of Bill Buckner. And Bill Buckner was probably one of the most quality uh, players in Major League Baseball during the 80s and 90s. I mean, he was a batting champion. He hit, he drove in over 100 runs many times in his career. He was actually also a very good fielder, and he came that close to making the Hall of Fame. He was not quite a Hall of Fame player, but he was very, very good. And I finished by saying, but what is Bill Buckner remembered for? That one game where the ball went through his legs with Mookie Wilson and the Mets came from behind and won. That's all he's ever remembered for. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago, but you know, that's the way it goes sometimes. You can be excellent, you could be par excellence in your field, be it weather or baseball or whatever, but if you make one mistake, people will get on you and never let you forget it. And that, unfortunately, you talk about having a hard skin. Joe and you, Nick, and I, and I'm sure all the other weathercasters on radio and television know what it's like to have to develop a hard skin because, again, more often than not, it's only when we're wrong that we hear from people, and boy, do we hear from them sometimes as well.
You brought up the astrometeorology uh, point, and there was a guy I went to school with who was big on that back at Linden. He was big on that, and I'm trying to remember the meteorologist who he was. Actually, he ended up going to work under him or studied under him. Crick, was it Crick?
Crick, yeah,
He
yeah.
was the astrometeorology guy, right? Was that his? I think so, right? I can't remember for sure, but anyway, it's funny that you brought that up. That brought back a
We
memory from
brought
the
this up with
past.
Alan Casper because Alan works side by side at CBS with Gordon Barnes.
Gordon, sure, and I knew Gordon from. He worked with me at CNN.
Yeah, so I mean, like Gordon Barnes was very big into making these ultra long range predictions. In fact, one night I was listening to Willard Scott on the Larry King show when he had a radio call in show in the overnight hours, and somebody called in and asked Willard Scott about Gordon Barnes. And Willard Scott said, "Ah, my good friend Gordon Barnes. He can tell you what the weather's going to be like 5 months from now, but he can't tell you what it's going to be like 2 days from now."
Yeah, Gordon was interesting. He was an interesting guy because I when I was doing the mornings at CNN back in the early '80s, so I was doing the 6 a.m. to noon slot, And then they decided that Gordon became available, and so Gordon was going to do 6 to 9, and I would do. We would do, like go back and forth, and then I would do 9 to 12. And so, but Gordon would be out of Washington D.C., so he'd be out of the D.C. bureau, and I'd have to like get his maps for him done, and then go on the air, with him, back and forth, whatever. So interesting guy, very very interesting guy. So. And then he ended up he moved to Texas, I think, after he left CNN, and was doing some aviation weather stuff. And then I think he passed away. What, about 6, 7 years ago, something like
No,
that.
a couple of years ago, 2, 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Nick,
Very
go
interesting.
ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, very interesting guy. I would ask one question to Nick. I mean, you have some stations that have people who are behind the scenes who provide all of the graphics and actually prepare the forecasts. But I think you're one of the few who actually does everything, right? Your
Here,
forecast.
here's my staff. Okay, that's my staff. Yeah. By the way, that's what, if you'd like to see what the weather center looks like, I can give you a little tour here, right? So we have our workstations here, and here. So and we have both the WSI or IBM, whatever you want to call them, Mac system, and we have Barron's Lynx. But no, we have no weather producers here. We kind of do our own work. We did have a morning weather producer for many many years, but the last one was Samantha O'Gary, who's out
Was it
on
News
Long
12?
Island now. News 12. Yep, she's a lovely person. I love Sam. A great meteorologist and just a super person to work with. So she ended up, and she was on the air here too. She'd be one of our fill-in people. So she took that job, and they never replaced her. I never had anybody in the evenings ever, but
Right.
Mike in the morning had somebody. That goes back to the '90s when they had weather producers in the morning. So, but we haven't had them, and I don't think we're getting them back. So.
Tony Mondaro. Thanks, Tony, for hitting the tip jar. And he says, Nick, thanks for being on tonight and being our voice of reason through all these years and your kindness when calling in those spotter reports. Tony
Yes,
Mondaro from
Tony.
Harrison, New Jersey.
Tony, thank you so much. He's always been very complimentary, and he'll send me a little message saying, "Hey, thanks for keeping it honest. I appreciate you listening in tonight, and we'll keep it doing. We'll keep going. We'll keep doing this, being as honest as we can."
The you now you fly you're a
Yes.
pilot, so you fly a plane. You wonder where this is going, don't you? Um,
I'm
so
keep going.
so, so
This
when
can go many directions, but keep going.
so because this is how I handle the um the what I call the entrail folks on social media, the contrails, they're
Hmm.
spraying. So when you get on your plane to spray the atmosphere to make it rain, actually, I tell them because there's a few of them. The one thing I bring this up because they're so annoying. They're so annoying, and they post. And if you read how they phrase their posts, they're looking for validation from me or from you. I'm sure you get them, Joe. You get them. I get them. They're looking for validation from you in how they word their posts, and they all seem to also use the same line where they'll just say, "Do your research." So when I ever get one, I usually respond by saying, "Oh yeah, I was up. I'm on the spraying committee. I get to decide. Either I tell them on the spraying committee, and I get to pick all the spots that we're going to spray. And I always tell them, and your spot is next." You
That's great.
Well,
know,
we,
but
one mutual friend of the three of us, I'm sure, Bill Corbell, who recently retired from News 12 and was on WOR, Rambling with Gambling show for many, many years. Bill was badgered to death by people in the who were disciples of the chemtrail uh, club. And when one person actually told Bill, he says, "We're only trying to educate you." And I'm saying to myself, educate Bill Corbell, who was in the armed services and who has been in meteorology now for many, many, many years or whatever. They're trying to, some kid is trying to educate him on chemtrails.
That's
It's
the
a,
phrase, yeah. Right. They're trying to educate you. I just love that. I just love it. That that's their that's their approach. By the way, Joe, we got 103 likes, so you have your job to do.
No, there it is. I love it.
But I
remember
bring that.
Thelma, remember Thelma on the Honeymooners, who was the maid in the Cranberry
Yes.
Bell
The bell.
If
to get her
that's
in.
if that's the good humor, man, get me a popsicle. But I bring that up because uh, over the last, I would probably say the last maybe 10 years, or certainly the last 5 years, uh, there's been an increasing politicalization of what we do. Some of it is direct, some of it is indirect. Uh, I I just wonder how I mean, I know how I handle it, and I just tell them, take a long walk off a short pier. Um, but I just wonder, how I mean, how do you deal with how do you deal with that part of it? Because some of it actually doesn't necessarily come from just what we see on social media, but you see a lot of these stories and the way news, the way news is presented, the way climate change stories are done. There's a certain amount of there's a certain amount of politics that gets sort of weaved into all of that. And I've always tried to just kind of stay away from it. And I try my job. I forecast weather. I'm not a climatologist. I don't know about ice rings and glaciers and all the rest of it. I mean, just basic stuff, yes, but that's really I can't. I'm not qualified to make determinations like that. Uh,
I take that same approach. I mean, I'm not, I like you just said, I forecast the weather. I'm a meteorologist. That's what I do. I forecast the week's weather. You know, if you're, if I'm feeling good, I'll give you more than a 7 day forecast, but usually not. So, I mean, how do you address that moving forward if it becomes more of an issue? I mean, the chemtrail, I unfortunately never been bothered by that, by those people. So
Well,
for the most part.
after tonight you
Uh,
may be,
I
but
was going
just
to say, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, yeah, I mean, I try to be very careful in my responses because that's not what I think I'm here to do. I mean, again, I'm not a climatologist. I don't. I know that there's a push. There's been a push through the American Meteorological Society that the meteorologists at television stations are quote the station scientists, and I agree to that to some degree. That yeah, we're scientists, yeah, but we're not all knowing scientists, right? What do we do? I mean, what is our specialty? So, with reference to climate change and uh, which is what we're calling it now, right? Versus global warming, which is global climate change, right? The term keeps changing. So um, I'm not a specialist in that. I might give you my opinion about it, but I don't. That's not my job. My job is to tell you the weather every night.
right, right. I mean, and that's pretty much it. I mean, when people ask me about it, I just say, look, I'll give you a science answer. I will give you also there's a science answer and there's a political answer to this. The science answer is if you look at any paper and any article with any scientific article is going to show you that the data is fairly clear that there has been a warming of the earth going on for the last 150 years. As you put it on a graph, the numbers go up. We can argue about whether it's a degree and a half or 2 degrees, but the earth, I think that's a given. But the political question is something else. Okay. The question about what do you do about it is something else. And that's something that I don't want to answer. It's just not
Yep.
it's not my job. Okay. That's a whole different, the only thing that that will do by answering that question is getting me into trouble. And I often say, if you can say something that gets both sides of you angry, then you know you're probably in the right spot. But it's a fine, but it's a very fine line to have to walk.
It is, and you have to. Well, you're right. You have to walk very, very carefully. We're in the media, we're in the public view, public eye, and when I sometimes get asked to do talks at a school or some type of an organization, some of those questions will come up. What do I say? I mean, you have to walk that fine line and like you said, give the science and leave the political banter to somebody else.
That's like some
Uh,
people, as we mentioned before, about the fact that, oh, now people are saying because of the fact that we've had a paucity of snow again this year, and we didn't have much in the way of snow last year. Oh, that's it. It's global warming, climate change. We're never, ever going to see big snow in the Northeast again. It's going to be horrible, terrible. We've gone this, and I tell people that nature has this way of, and there comes that comment again, that analogy, balancing the checkbook. And we could go through a number of snowless or near snowless winters, but eventually everything is going to flip. And to give you an idea, an example is what we're just seeing now out in the West Coast. 3, 4 years ago, there were parts of California that were under not just drought and not just severe drought, but I mean exceptional or severe drought. The whole state of California was in red or shades of dark red to indicate how badly the situation was in terms of how much they needed water. Oh, please, we need water. Oh, this is terrible. We're never going to see it. And all of a sudden now, in the last couple of years, with these atmospheric rivers, a new meteorological term that the media has allowed in, all of a sudden now, there's so much rain out in California, mudslides and everything else, that there's no drought whatsoever from one end of the state to the other. And I say to people, I said, that could very well happen here. We could go through a number of years with not much in the way of snow, but then again, we may be in line, who knows how many years down the road, for a series of Lollapalooza winters where we get heavy duty snows. In fact, it wasn't just a few years ago we were seeing here heavy snow. I think it was 2, 3 years ago we had a heavy snowfall, blizzard-like conditions in March here in the tri-state area, and now here we are with people complaining like, "Oh, we're never going to see it snow again." And I like Gary Gardner's comment, the rubber band effect. It is. It's a rubber band effect. I personally believe that we're going to be seeing big snows, if not this year, and maybe even not next year, but down the road we are going to get clobbered. We're going to make up for all the snow that we had not seen before, and then of course what's going to happen? People are going to be complaining and saying, "Oh, why are we getting all this snow? It was so nice when we didn't get snow." You can't please everybody in weather, unfortunately, right?
well,
I like to make the analogy that it's like an equation, right? So what meteorology is all physics and it's calculus, fluid dynamics, right? So what do we learn in basic math? 2 + 2 = 4, right? If the equation doesn't work, then it's not balanced. So the atmosphere to me is an equation, and eventually it has to equal, or it doesn't work. That's
well,
my simple answer.
I know Bill Goodman, who from NWS in Upton on Long Island. Uh, he and I talk a lot. In fact, we talked right before the show came on the air tonight, because he's tired of having it rain on weekends, and I certainly don't blame him for that. But he was doing some research, and one thing that one of the things in terms of his research, as far as winters and snowfalls are concerned, at least in the New York area, is that and you may have, I'm sure you probably noticed this too, because uh, the kinds of storms that we get that we got when we were kids, and from the 70s and 80s and in the 90s, has kind of changed. We've gone from getting, you'd get a peppering of little storms, and every once in a while you'd get a big storm. But that the number of smaller storm systems, the number of smaller snow producers has dropped, but the number and the magnitude of the big snowstorms has gone up, which I think is kind of interesting, because if we talk about this rubber band effect, which I'm also a proponent of, I mean, I think at some point, at some point, if you look at the long-term average, you look at whatever the long-term average is, further away that you get away from that long-term average on either side, you're going to at some point have to, compensate by going in the other direction. So I would make the case that when the snapback comes, and it will come, Joe Rayo, you're right, it is going to come. It may not be next year, it may not be the year after, but one year it's going to come. And when it does, it's going to be in a very big way. I mean, we're going to, and I was kind of curious on your, about your thoughts on this.
I agree. I mean, there's no question in my mind exactly what you guys are talking about. That it's going to come back, and when it does, it'll come back in a big way. Visa 1995, 96. 17 storms and what have you.
Right, and that was an exception in a 30-year, what you would call a 30-year downtrend in snowfall that occurred from
Right.
1970 to 2000.
Yeah. So exactly, but you're right. I mean, I think we'll go back to those winters that were so known for back in those days. It's funny. Sometimes people come up to me and be like, "Hey, Nick, those snowstorms don't, like when I was a kid. They don't happen anymore." I'm like, "Well, you're also 3 foot tall when you were a kid,
Right, you're
so
3 foot tall.
the snow was a little
Also,
bit bigger."
as every year we get older, we have to, I have to remember that when I'm talking to somebody, I got to ask them how old they are, because if they're our
Right.
age, that statement is totally false. However, if they were born in 1990 and they lived through the 2000 to 2020 period, then yeah, it did snow a lot more than when you were a kid than it has in the last 4 or 5 years. So,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah, makes sense, right? Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. I agree. I think the rebound is coming.
Joe
And I,
Joe S says, first of all, thank you, Joe. I would just want to two tip jar hits tonight to mention. Joe S. Now three. Uh, Thank you for hitting the tip jar, and Chuck Cardillo. Thank you for hitting the tip jar. Chuck says, uh, "Thank you, Nick, for joining the Joe and Joe show. It's an honor to see three great meteorologists on one video at the same time. You guys are the best." Thank you, Chuck, very much. And Joe S says, "What do you think of the?" Also, thank you for hitting super chat. What do you think of the NWS and their forecasters? I liked it when it was real voices on NOAA weather radio. Nick is a true professional. Nick is a true professional, doesn't hype.
I try not to, right? Hyping doesn't get you anywhere. So,
No, it becomes a problem if you do.
right. Yeah, you remember the old NWS radios that days? You were at the Weather Service back then, right? So
Yes,
Tom
I
Grant, right, was Tom Grant, and can't remember all the other guys. I mean, Tom was the guy who knew
landlords
the best
are
back
landlords are advised to keep the heat up under
there.
these extreme conditions.
we go back with some of those guys. Tom Morgan,
Tom
Gunther.
Morgan had the best Brooklyn accent on radio. He had the consummate Brooklyn accent, and he was perfect. It was a great, and he told some great stories. My favorite one, and I've shared this many times, but I'll share it with you. So the record high for the month of May for New York City on paper, it's 99. Okay, but in reality, it was actually 101. Okay, and Tom Morgan used to tell this great story about on that particular day, the forecaster had to put out his forecast, and the morning forecast was for a high of 65 to 70, and they had to keep sending out new forecasts, 75 to 80, 80 to 85, and the temperature kept going up, 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 up. So you know finally the thermometer just goes to 90, 80, 98, 99, 100, 101. And the forecaster on duty, he never said who the forecaster's name was, but the forecaster on duty was so incensed about what transpired that day that he went over to the observer and threatened him with his life. That if he said, put put down 99. What's the honeymooners episode, Joe? Oh, when he's doing the crossword puzzle and he tells Norton, he says, put down Nad. Was it put
Put
down
down
Nad?
Nat.
Put
Put
down
down Nat.
Nad. That's the forecaster told the observer, you know, if you put down 101, I'm going to kill you. You know, put down 99. It was one of the great, greats. And he used to have the old, you know, God, I can't, it's hard to remember things. What they used to call, not in the old days, like, not a Xerox. Joe, help me with this. It's not a
Graph.
Xerox of a map. Well, when they used to keep things in archives, and you'd have to go to the microfilm kind of thing.
Microfilm, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So he had a printout of this microfilm from the '47 blizzard and all the maps that they had for that day. That was one of the coolest things I think I ever saw. It was the relationship. What's interesting is I always felt like the relationship between the TV people, TV and the weather service was more adversarial back in the day. Um,
Yes.
and thankfully it's not like that anymore. I mean, I think the weather service guys are great. They do a fantastic job with all that they have to handle, and plus, the weather service. I can't sing their praises enough with regards to what they've done with their websites and the weather information that they have and the models and all of this. Because when you go to, I mean, at least from what I've seen, when you look at European websites, weather websites, I mean, the information is so minimal. They don't have the access like they don't have the access that the public has access to here in the United States.
I think what you were referring to back in those days was that there was this unspoken competition,
Yes,
right?
that's
That would
that's
that would go
probably
on. Yeah, it'd be going on
adversarial
between
is
the TV
probably the
weather
wrong
people.
word.
Yeah, it was sort of it was this unspoken competition of, oh, what's the weather service going for? And over time it grew into a partnership instead of this unspoken competition where they would appreciate our input, and of course we would appreciate their input and sharing all of their data and asking us. I'd get emails, from the MIC with different events going on, that kind of stuff, which is terrific, right? So the partnership is how I look at it now.
Yeah. Jason Barry on the chat board asks, "What do you think of the new Euro AI model?"
I just started seeing some things about that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there was that one forecast I saw in the last week was like
What
major.
the 64 low at Cape Cod? Yeah,
That's the one.
I saw that. I saw that
So
too.
let's just say it needs work. Right?
Well,
It's
I think we need to look at it and play with it for a couple of months to see how it's doing.
sure,
I mean,
absolutely,
I noticed in the
absolutely.
short range, from what's available on the short range, once it gets inside that 3-4 day time frame, it's probably no better or no worse than any of the other models. And as far as the long range, it's probably no crazier than the other models.
Good way to put it. By the way, well, since you brought up the honeymooners, we're gonna do a little trivia here, right? So here's the studio, and this studio, by the way, is one of the older television studios in Manhattan because this was the Dumont Television Theater, and this is where the original Jackie Gleason show came
No
before the
kidding.
honeymooners. Yeah, it was right here, Studio 5, and there's a big freight elevator on the other side of the weather center here, and they used to bring up cars, and they put the cars in the studio here. So the original Jackie Gleason show was from right here, from the Dumont Television Theater, as they called it back then.
I'm glad you
I
mentioned
I,
that because I wanted to ask you about what I think you once noted was one of the highlights of your broadcasting career. And I'm well acquainted with 205 East 67th Street because when I was a very young boy, I had allergies to dust and feathers, and I used to get a shot every Monday at the New York hospital, which is not too far away from.
yeah, just down the street here.
Yeah. And one day, my mom and I were walking along, and this is back in 1964, 65. Channel 5 was nothing more than a little more white marquee with a big 5 on it. And my mom said, "Oh, this is Channel 5. You want to go inside and see?" And Channel 5 back then, for those of you who are not, you can't remember that, Joe and I do, and maybe Nick does as well. I mean, Channel 5 back then was great for kids. They had Uncle Fred Scott, and they had Chuck McCann, and all these
Wonderama.
Wonder.
Wonderama, of course.
And I used to go, I used to do, they used to tape Just for Fun, which was a Sonny Fox show on Saturday mornings, but they taped it on Mondays. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, I would actually slip in to the studio, sit in the bleachers, and be part of the show. Sonny Fox was the host on it, and I even got a chance to be on Wonderama by again sneaking in, all because of the fact that I was like, but one of the absolute number one star at Channel 5 back in the 1960s was none other than Soupy Sales. And
Soupy Sales.
here here Nick is now going to tell you the highlight of his career when he was walking down the corridor. I think Soupy Sales came back for some nostalgic tour or
He
whatever,
did.
and he's coming from one direction, you're coming from the other, and tell everybody what happened after that.
So Soupy was coming in. It was Friday night. He was going to tape a Saturday movie extravaganza, like all afternoon movie, whatever. But he couldn't tape it, do it live. He couldn't do it during the day. So they were actually going to hold the crew over, and they were going to do it after our 10 o'clock news. So that's when the weather office was on the third floor, and again here at studio I'm on the fifth floor, and so I knew Soupy was coming. Of course, big Soupy Sales fan, with Fang and the whole thing, right? Growing up watching Soupy. So yeah, that's it. That's it. So I walk downstairs and I'm in the weather center and I hear this commotion in the outer newsroom, right? And one person says, "Hey, Soupy Sales is here." I'm like, oh my God, I have to go meet Soupy Sales. And so I walk down the hall, like you said, and I'm turning the corner, and there he is. And I'm going to go up, say, Soupy, what a fan, from all these years. And before I can get a word out of my mouth, he looks at me, and Soupy I didn't realize how tall he was. He's a really tall individual. He looks at me and goes, "Oh my God." And his Soupy Sales, he goes, "Nick Gregory, my favorite weatherman." Well, I just about right there, right? I just so the nicest guy, he was just the way he is in person. That's how he would talk, and just what a fun night that was to get a chance to meet Soupy.
I mean, Nick, did you ever think that when you were young and watching Soupy on Channel 5, that years later, that he would approach you as the celebrity and say,
No,
it's Nick Gregory, my favorite weatherman." That
never
must have
crossed my mind.
That's
But it was quite the moment.
that's a great thing when that happens. Mark G, thanks for hitting the tip jar, Mark. And he says, my Nick Gregory memory and a little dirty secret, but rated G. He says,
Okay.
uh, I didn't like watching your weather reports because winters stunk in the 1980s, and you told the truth. As hard as it was as a kid, thanks for keeping it real.
Thank you very much. I
And
appreciate that. And I am as you know, a diehard snow lover too. So you know how hard it is when you have to forecast from the brain, whatever's up there,
right,
versus the heart, right? You got to be realistic. I'd love to go and forecast snowstorms, and you'd see people go crazy about them, but and that's the other thing now, right? If we go, let's go back to the social media conversation. So many people post all of this stuff that is just nonsense. I have, there's a friend of mine here. Is a producer. He's a big weatherman, loves weather. He goes crazy for weather. He blows up my phone with all these Twitter posts. This guy's saying this guy's saying that. And I tell him, turn it off. Don't look at it. Don't believe it. It's not true.
I
Uh,
call I call it forecast shopping. Okay, and I tell people specifically, I point out, I said, you've been forecast shopping. And I mean, I work with a few snow removal guys, and um, and they forecast shop, and I understand that they do. I understand that that's what they do. Um, no matter how many times I try to tell them, it's like, try not to forecast shop. You'll be a much calmer human being if and saner human being. But it doesn't stop them, and you're never going to
No,
stop them, you know.
no.
But I abhor forecast shopping. And by the way, and along that subject line, by the way, um, when somebody says, "Well, Nick, you're saying this, but so and so is saying that," okay, and I often wonder whether that person then goes to the other person and says, "You know, Nick is saying this, but Joe is saying that." It's why I don't understand. I don't understand why if why people do that. I mean, I kind of get why the snow removal guys do it, but in general, all right, if you're saying 6 inches and somebody else is saying 8 inches, is it really worth the trouble because there's a 2 inch difference? I don't get it.
I don't get it either. And my response to that usually is, "Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Have at it. That's their opinion, and that's my opinion. And that's their forecast. That's my forecast, and we'll see who's right and who's not."
Channel 5, originally when they started with the 10 o'clock news, which was unique back in the mid 60s, I think 1966, 67, to have a newscast start at 10 o'clock. And they had a veteran, apparently, newscaster, Bill Jorgensen, who was kind of like semi Walter Cronkite-ish, so to speak. But for all of those years, for the first 10 years, they didn't have a meteorologist. They just simply read the
No.
forecast. Then they picked up Tex Antoine after he had been booted off of Channel 7 for about a year in 1978, replaced him with a former beauty contest winner in New Jersey, Linda Gianella, who main forte was not so much weather, but to drawing cartoons relating to the weather. And then they had Bob Harris. This was after Bob was outed as not having a PhD. And then he moved on to Channel 11. And then they moved to you. So you had some very interesting predecessors who really were not that weather oriented. And now, all these years later, there's probably no more knowledgeable person on television. Well, you're one of the more knowledgeable people because there are others. We've had others here on Joe and Joe. But I mean,
Sure.
It's evolved from
Couple.
no weather. It's evolved from no weather to people drawing cartoons to somebody like yourself who again has a very high responsibility and
But
has
it also for years early on, and Nick, you probably can relate to this, but from years early on in certainly in my career and I think in Joe's career too, in terms of television, you spent a lot of time trying to convince people to give you the time that was necessary with regards to what you got to do, and
Yeah.
now of course it's completely reverse, and you're on a newscast multiple times an hour. Uh, on we've got newscasts that start at 4 in the morning and go to 10 o'clock in the morning here in Georgia. So and the weather person's on every 10 minutes or so, and sometimes I wonder whether be careful what you wish for. I mean,
Yes.
it just finally got to a point when I was working at FiOS. Every once in a while, something would happen, and it was very strict times. There was three weathercasts in a half an hour. One was 30 seconds, one was a minute, and then the last one was like a minute or a minute. I'm sorry, it was uh, 30 to 45 seconds for the first weather. That it was either like a minute or a minute 15 for a second, and the third weather was for a minute 30. But every once in a and they pretty well stuck to that. But every once in a while, they would come in and cut it down. And the producers would always come down, just sort of like really pleading with me, just sort of say, would you mind, Kim? Could you just like go 30 seconds instead of 45? And I'd always respond by, you know what? The decimal point in my paycheck is in exactly the same spot, no whether I do 3 minutes or 30 seconds. I could
That's my
care
line.
less. I couldn't care
That's my
less.
line. My paycheck's the same, is what I say. But we can't forget Glenn Schwartz. Glenn Schwartz was here. Glenn
Yes.
Hurricane Schwartz, right? He was actually before me. He was the main guy, and then when I started here in December '86, I started as weekends, and then they switched us in June of '87, and he went to weekends and I went to weekdays. But the story about time, when I first came to the station, we had a managing editor back then. His name was Bob Fassbender, and I walked into the newsroom and he came up to shake my hand. Yeah, hey Nick, I watch you on CNN. Welcome to Channel 5. He goes in, and because I saw you on CNN, just know you get 2 minutes, hot, cold, wet, or dry. That's it. That was his introduction to me. So, and
Nice.
now, of course, now it's like, the producers are like, how can we find something to lead with weather tonight? Oh, we're going to have a flurry. Let's lead with weather.
Right. Are we going to have them? And of course, then the tease would be: Are we going to have a blizzard tomorrow morning? Gregory's coming up next with that, and of course, you're just like at that point, you're just like, oh, you know,
It's funny. I did about 2 years as the morning meteorologist at 1010 Winds. This is after they briefly dropped AccuWeather and shadow traffic or shadow broadcasting, convinced them that, hey, we could find local people to do the weather. And somehow or other, I ended up as the morning drive guy on 1010 Winds for a couple of years. They actually put a switched 56 box. I know Nick used to do WLTW, correct?
Yes,
And,
I did with an ISDN line back then.
right. So they did the same thing with me. And there was the first winter, there was no snow. It was kind of like a winter well, not quite as bad as this winter, but I mean, there was hardly any snow. And I actually got a phone call from not the news director, but like the general manager saying, now you have to understand here that our ratings are driven by weather. And if we don't have any big storms, we're not going to get as many people to listen to us as when we have big storms. When we have storms, we're the first station that everybody tunes to. He was talking to me as if I had control of the weather. And what am
Of
I going to
course,
say? I'm going
but
to
of course you do.
I just after I got the phone, I said, I salute you, sir. Yes, I will. I'll do my best next time, or I'll do my best next winter, or whatever. It's crazy, but that's what, and it's in television too. We realize now they don't tune on the news to hear about politics. They don't turn the news on to hear about sports. They turn the news on to hear about us. That's what drives. Really, the newscasts are driven by the weather, plain and simple.
Yeah, yeah, and the research shows that, right? You all the way, I mean, all through times here and other stations. What do consultants tell you? Consultants say the number one reason people watch TV news is for weather. So
That unfortunately, I think when the consultants told the people who control the news, the corporate suits, they said, weather drives the newscast. That's when I think that the change started toward, well, we don't really need those scholarly, sometimes not good looking guys. They may know a lot, but we need to get somebody. In other words, I said with Alan Casper, I said, now it's not so much what's inside the package, it's what's on the outside of the package. If the package looks good, it doesn't really matter what is inside of the package, what contains. And that's why you have what you have. And you have people like Joe and myself who could not continue in this business simply because they're old guys. They've been around too long. Let's get some nice fresh faces in here, and that pretty well I think is what a lot of weathercasts today
right.
are.
Well, when FiOS finally shut down, I had been thinking about doing this on my own for a while, but you always when you've worked for someone all of your career, and you suddenly start thinking, well, maybe I could try this and do it on my own with you know social media, the platforms, and all the rest of it. And the I always felt that I had been thinking about it, but I was afraid to do it. And when FiO shut down, it was a blessing. I mean, I immediately took it as a blessing because I thought, you know what, this is now I don't really have a choice. And I have to tell you, and I've come to the conclusion, at least for me, that I kind of wish in some ways that I was 20 years younger because I love this. This to me is is the ultimate because it's my show. Well, it's our show, uh, but we both have equal billing. So, but it's
What
you
do you
know,
mean
it's
we have
my
equal billing? I always knew it as the Joe and Schmo show.
no, no, yeah, well, but my point is that no one can, here we are now. It's 8:54. I mean, we've been on for an hour and 20 some odd minutes.
Yeah,
Um,
Nick has to go to work, go back to work, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
eventually.
you just tell your bosses that you're on the Joe and Joe Weather Show
Oh,
podcast, and
well,
that they
exactly.
should
That's
push the newscast start back to at least 10:30. I'm sure they'll accommodate.
of course they
No,
will.
but my point is, but the point is that you know I I love this because I don't have a boss to tell me, uh, I can't do this. No, you can't go. You can't do an hour and 20-minute show on weather. No, you can't write your weather this way. You can't say this that way. Whatever it is, you know. I'm just being general from that respect, but that to me this I think of all the years, I mean, my happiest times work wise was when I worked at Channel 11. That was such a wonderful experience all the way around. And, you know, you talked about general managers before. If it wasn't for this one evil general manager who should burn in hell, I probably would have lasted at least a few years longer, but that's a story for another day. Um, but
Well,
anyway,
I think what you're saying is a good lesson for everybody, though, right? Because I think we love what we do and we want to do it forever, and this business is not one of those businesses that it always works out that way, right? Because
no, it's rare that it does, and it's
uh,
a testament to
yeah.
your success because, you've lasted in one place
Well,
for as many years as you
I'm
have, and
I'm more
God
the
willing,
exception
many
than the
more.
rule, though, right? But I'm more the exception than the rule, I suppose. But I mean, and I've been very blessed and fortunate that that's been the case, and I don't take that for granted, for sure. But I think what you were saying and what I mean, I wasn't always the main person here. I got pushed to weekends. I went back to evenings. I got pushed to middays. I go, whatever. So I moved around the circuit here, and each time one of those changes has happened, like for example, the first time when I ended up getting moved to weekends, well, I only was working Saturday, Sundays. They weren't making me come in Monday through Friday unless I was going to fill in. So what am I going to do with my time now? So I was already a pilot. Well, maybe I'll get some additional pilot ratings, and I became a flight instructor, and I started teaching flying, which I wouldn't have thought of doing before that, right? So, and that sort of has evolved to like a plan B or like a second side career, right? So I've gone from being a flight instructor, and I still am an active flight instructor, and I'm now an FAA designated examiner. So I actually give the flight tests on behalf of the FAA. If you had asked me that 30 years ago or whatever, no, I wouldn't have thought of that. And and I love doing that too. And so that turned me on to like what you were just saying, that was I ever going to delve into that side of me? Well, I don't know. It's kind of a big risk, and the forces of the time put me in that direction, and it's just a good lesson for everybody to have that plan B, or don't poo poo something that you think you're afraid to do or you want to move forward on, because you might find that it's great.
I
You
agree
do,
with you 100%, Nick. And since I've stopped doing television, I really wanted to get back into television. As you know, I tried my best for quite some time to get back in, and when I was suddenly aware that no, I wasn't going to get back in, no matter how hard I banged on the door. But fortunately, I do a lot of freelance writing for a number of different science publications, which have kept me going. And also, I'm doing talks, library talks, and talks virtually. This is amazing to me. I can do these talks right here from this room that I'm talking to you right now for libraries and civic groups. And I've done very well with that. So it's always good, regardless of how good you're going in one field, to have something else to fall back on. And that's what Joe has done, and that's what I've done. And you've got your flying, so we're all
Yeah,
happy. We're all
exactly. Got to do what makes you happy, right? You can't always chase the money. I mean, it helps if it goes together, but if you're not happy, you want to go to work miserable all the time. I don't. So
Is that the Chinese takeaway that's calling on the telephone? Or?
yeah, no, that's my 10 o'clock producer wanting to tell me about the 10 o'clock rundown, but I'll
All right.
I'll call them back.
Well, are you sure? I mean, it's coming up on 9 o'clock. If you got to go, just let me know. Let us
I
know.
mean, soon I got it. Well, I got to give him a call back and then start working on some updated graphics for the 10.
All right,
So,
then he can wait.
because like I said, my staff, I put my staff on it, but I, I have to take care of it myself.
So,
I, for one, want to just thank you, Nick, for spending so much time with us tonight. And I know a lot of the folks on the chat board enjoyed it. And you're certainly welcome to come back anytime you'd like and chat
Thank you.
about whatever you'd like to talk about, or when we have another big storm, 3 or 4 years from now.
Now, let's not be that pessimistic.
seriously,
Uh,
we'd love to have you back anytime.
Thank you. Well,
I've got,
thank you for
I'm,
having me. This was really terrific. When I saw
I,
the again Alan's show, I was like, and then Joe said, when we'd love to have you come on, and thank you again for having me. It's
people
really
seem
been
to be
fun.
afraid to come on this show. I don't know why. I mean, it's not like I chew people up and spit them out. There
I
are
think,
there
I
are a
think
couple of people that I would like to do that to, but
I was going to say that's some people
but I won't
that's
let them.
very
I
deserved.
won't let them on the show. And so
it's
that's
very,
there's that.
it's very strange. And I encountered this too when I was at News 12. You'd always have to clear it with somebody. You'd have to clear it either with human resources or with your news director. Now, exactly why are you going to appear on such and such, show or whatever? Can we have the questions in advance on anything? I mean, like they're afraid that they're going to damage your reputation by appearing on the show. But I think Nick will agree. The only thing we've done is just simply bow to the fact that one of New York's legendary television weather
Uh,
been on tonight.
you're too kind. You're too kind. But listen, it's been a pleasure being with you guys, and you guys are terrific. You've had such uh, such love of the meteorology, and look at all that you've done and contributed to our science and our field, and you should all be saluted and rewarded as well.
Thank you, thank you
Thank you.
much. And if they do give you, if your general manager does give you a hard time, you just have him call me, and I'll set him straight on.
We'll do that, right?
I'll tell him you give that young man a raise and a long-term contract because now he's made it to the big time.
That's right. Now that I've hit the show, it's like going to be no turning
I mean,
back
look at
now.
you. You got all dressed up for us. You wore a tie.
Nick has no problems. He's now also, as of a couple of years ago, he got his first Emmy. Congratulations on that.
First and only Emmy, but I'll take it. I'll take this. That was
Was
exciting.
that for the best weathercaster award?
No, it was. We did a winter special,
Oh,
winter
nice.
storm weather forecast special. So me, Audrey, Mike, and Sam was part of that too. They Fox or one of the producers submitted. I think Audrey might have submitted the show to the Emmys, and we won. So that was kind of exciting.
It's
So
awesome. That's awesome.
yeah, my one and only
Congratulations.
Emmy. I always tease Ernie and ask this because Ernie has like at his house he's got like a collection on this
Right.
wall of about like 10 Emmys. I'm like, I got one. That's fine for me.
Well, you have one. I have two. And Joe is the Susan Lucci of this group because he's got
Oh
what
boy.
was it eight nominations, Joe?
I've been to the plate 8 times and struck out all 8 times, but
Oh goodness.
to get the nomination was an honor. So
It really is. I mean, I know people make
It
fun,
is.
they joke about that, but it really is. But again, thank you for taking the time. I know Alan's probably still
Thank you.
glued to the YouTube, so
Hi, Alan. So yeah. So thank
and
you again. It's great to be here.
next time you're on with us, Nick, we'll talk about the chicken episode.
Okay. We'll save that. We'll keep people waiting for that one then. So,
all right. Well, everybody, thank you for being here tonight, and again, big thanks to Nick for coming on. and Joe and I will be back tomorrow night. What's tomorrow's start time, Joe? 8:30.
It's about yes, 8:30.
So tomorrow night start time is 8:30. Wednesday's start time will be 7:30, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and possibly next Sunday will all be off days. Okay, I'm not sure about next Sunday. Uh, it's gonna take a drive down to Pensacola, Florida, for a few days to visit some friends. So that's my plan of attack. Uh, anyhow, that's it, guys. So, gals, we'll see you tomorrow. Nighty night.
Night, folks.
Good night.